Hey everybody, it's Henry Lawrence Harrison here with another chapter or two of William Ramsey's Astrology Restored. So, if you are watching these videos during the time that I'm publishing them, you know how tired everyone is right now. Things are very slow, but I'm excited to do this. I really like reading this book to make these videos. So I think I've been deliberating on it. What we're going to do is we're going to read this chapter 4 here, and then we're going to review some essential and accidental debilities. And we're going to look at the third book on elections. As an astrologer that doesn't know very much about elections, this should be fun. I just struggle to use that kind of astrological thinking. I think it has merit and wisdom, and that's why we're going to explore it. But just so you know, I'm not approaching this as someone who has experience in the application of that side of astrology, all right? But it'll be fun to dig into, and I think it will throw a lot more light on this fourth section, which is what I'm hoping for. So, all right, so we're going to begin with chapter 4. Of the significators of rich and noble men, the king's standard or armor bearer, also clergymen, and of students, merchants, lawyers, and women in general, also friars and monks, and these according to the significations of the planets. I shall here only give you the general significators of these, according to the ancients, as brief as may be, that I may proceed to the second section, having at large spoken of them already in the second book. Wherefore know that rich and noble men are signified by Jupiter, and the Lord of the sign in which he is located, in the sun his ingress into Aries. Soldiers, armor or standard bearers, generals of armies, and the like, are understood by Mars. The ninth house and the Lord thereof denotes clergymen in particularly, and generally they are signified by Jupiter. Also judges and the graver sort of men, students, merchants, and lawyers, and scribes, clerks, and all penmen, picture drawers, and ingenious wits, also youth and young men in general, are signified by Mercury. Venus generally denotes women and all females. See chapter 5, book the second. And the moon, the vulgar and rural sort of people. As the sun, you have heard, doth emperors and kings. And lastly, all such as live obscurely and devoutly to the service of God, as monks, abbots, friars, and the like, amongst the papists, as in the first chapter of the second book, and amongst us such as slight all things in the world, in comparison of God's service and divine meditation, are signified by Saturn. As touching cities and countries, subject both to the signs and planets, you have also fully heard them declared in the second book, where we treat of them. Now, to know the state and condition of any of these in a general way, in any annual revolution, you have no more to do but this. Look to your significator, and from which judgment is to be required, and see if he be essentially or accidentally strong or assisted, and judge according to his strength or debility, good or bad, to the parties signified. For if well dignified and located, good may be expected; if afflicted, impeded, the contrary, etc. So what I thought we'd do would be to look over here at the essential and accidental debilities of Ptolemy, which I've just pulled from the internet. I assume that they're all up to snuff, traditional, so on. All right, so we'll just take a quick glance at the terms and the faces where the planets are during the annual revolution for the fixed signs in 2021 real quick, and then we'll read a little bit about accidental fortitudes and debilities. These are the essential fortitudes and debilities, the which, you know, is best just to memorize of yourself and just to acquaint yourself with over time. I don't think it's something that can be hastily learned, but so we got these two charts here. So this is easier to read, so I suppose we'll just read it. So to be brief, the essential dignities are a planet in his own house or in mutual reception with another planet by house shall have dignities. So mutual reception, there isn't any mutual reception that I have seen in the charts we've looked at, but there was one that happened recently that was certainly welcome, and that was the transit of Venus through Capricorn with Mars in Taurus, a sort of mutual reception by the exaltation. Mars is exalted in Capricorn while Venus is in her own house in Taurus. So, and they had the trine. So that was quite a good state of affairs, if you can recognize it when you live through it. All right, in his exaltation or reception by exaltation. So that was an example of a very strong, especially with the trine, a very strong reception there. In his own triplicity, in his own term, and decant or face. So I agree with the idea that a planet in his own triplicity and face is about as strong as being in their own house. But I suppose that in his own house is slightly more dignified. Okay. So for the debilities, the essential debilities, in his detriment, in his fall, or peregrine, each getting 5, 4, 5 debilities. So, to define that simply, my brain has a hard time imagining this, but it is very clear. A planet in detriment is opposite to his own house, I believe. So Mars is in detriment because he's opposite his house of Scorpio. He's also in detriment when he's in Libra. But he's not in his fall unless he's opposite his exaltation, which would be Capricorn to Cancer there. And a peregrine would be when he doesn't have any dignities at all. So our Mars during our current transit is debilitated in Taurus. Do we have any peregrine planets? I'm not entirely sure I understand the definition of peregrine well enough to tell you why it earns 5 debilities, but let me just look at Simonite's Arcana here. A peregrine planet is one posited in a sign where it has no essential dignity of any kind. It is reckoned a debility of 5 degrees. So that's all. even if we could just leave it at that, that's fine. So Mars, is Mars peregrine in this place? Well, it's in Taurus. It's having the mutual reception from Venus, and it's in the term of Venus until the 8th degree. Are we still in the 8th degree? Yes. So Mars has these essential dignities here, which are saving it from being detriment, or peregrine, I believe, because it still has some measure of essential dignities. Triplicity, not in his triplicity. He's not in his term. He's not in his face. He is in reception. So we'll have to see how that definition of peregrine and detriment work together. I'm not entirely clear on it, but anyway, we're just brushing over it, as best we can. So accidental fortitudes. If the planet is in the midheaven or ascendant, if it's in the 7th, 4th, or 11th houses, in the 2nd and 5th, in the 9th, in the 3rd. That's all interesting. So the midheaven and the ascendant are, of course, the 10th or the 1st house. I'll remind you that these aren't things I completely have under my belt here either. So I'm a little astonished reading these as well, because these have fairly broad applications. You could look at this in transiting, horary, or electional, or mundane astrology. So there's a lot of implications here. So let's just kind of sink in that the 10th and the 1st have the most accidental fortitudes, which makes sense because they're both angles. They're both, the 1st, 4th, 10th, and 7th are all very strong. So we have those all included. I understand why the 4th and the 7th aren't as strong intuitively, but why is the 11th? I couldn't tell you exactly why the 11th. Perhaps that it's the strongest of the, what are they called? The fixed houses. If we're talking about houses, we usually say angular, fixed, or cadent. So of the fixed houses, I suppose the 11th is stronger than the 2nd or the 5th, and then the 9th coming in order there. And the 3rd house would be the strongest of the cadent houses, I suppose. A planet being in a cadent house doesn't allow for very much. Okay? Because it's falling away, you understand? It's diminishing. That all intuitively makes sense. Direct planet for fortitudes, that makes sense. Swift in motion is certainly a fortitude. A planet not moving can be very hard to work with, or, about to turn. Oriental and Occidental. Now, these are definitions I understand fairly well. I believe that Oriental is when they are in front of the sun in zodiacal order, but let's just be sure, because that'd be really great to make clear right now if we could. These are all very nice definitions we can look at when we're looking at the mundane astrology or the annual revolution. So let's see. Simonite. I'm sure Simonite has it. Okay. Oriental. Planets found between the fourth house and the midheaven, rising, are in the eastern part of the figure and said to be oriental. When they have passed the midheaven and they reach the fourth again, they are occidental. Okay, so that's actually just dividing up the chart. I think there is a definition for oriental and occidental of the sun, but we'll just leave it at that. So looking back at this chart for, what are we looking at right now, I believe? We have from the 4th to the 10th, in this figure that's Libra to Aries, they are all oriental. And are they rising? Let's make sure. No. Those are the occidental planets. So that's the occidental axis falling away. They're not rising. They're heading towards the 7th house. You see that? They're going under by going into the 7th house. So they are not rising. The only planet that's rising right now appears to be the Moon and Mars. Okay, so in our current scheme, Mars and the North Node perhaps gain accidental fortitudes by being occidental. Isn't it so? Let's make sure. Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, when oriental, gain 2 accidental fortitudes. But when Mercury and Venus are occidental, they gain 2 accidental fortitudes. So those are all happening at the moment. Okay. The Moon increasing, or when she is occidental, gains 2 accidental fortitudes. The Moon is increasing right now, given that it's the 6th day of the Moon. All right. Free from combustion in sun's beams, gains 5 accidental fortitudes. In the heart of the sun, or Cassimi, 5 fortitudes. In partile, that means bodily aspect. Conjunction and a partile, so it's still increasing. It hasn't left. That makes it a partile. So that means this Venus or Jupiter in bodily conjunction with another planet gains 5 fortitudes. In partile conjunction with the North Node, 4 fortitudes. So that's good to know for our 2021 fixed chart for sure, because it has that Mars is partile with the North Node. So it's accidentally strong where it might otherwise be peregrine. So that's good to know. In partile trine to Jupiter and Venus, in partile sextile to Jupiter and Venus, in conjunction with Coriolanus in 24th degrees, or conjunction with Spica in 18 degrees of Leo and Libra, of course. Okay, so we're punching through it. We've got the accidental debilities in the 12th, -5. It's 5 accidental debilities in the 8th and the 6th, two accidental debilities, retrograde 5, slow in motion 2, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars occidental, so that's just the opposite. It gains accidental debilities instead. Venus and Mercury oriental, 2 debilities. Moon decreasing in light, 2 debilities. Combustion of the sun, 5. Under sun's beams, 4. Partile conjunction with Saturn or Mars, 5 debilities. Partile conjunction with the south node, 4 debilities. Besieged of Saturn and Mars, 5 debilities. That's going to be important for the 2022 chart, and that was also the case in the 2020 chart. So, partile opposition of Saturn or Mars, partile square of Saturn or Mars, 4 debilities and 3 debilities respectively, in conjunction with Caput Algol in 20 degrees Taurus or within 5 degrees. So particularly debilitating star in 20 degrees Taurus. All right, so at least we did that with a broad brush, right? I think our most important things to consider, if you count debilities and fortitudes, that makes sense for you to do so. I'm not there yet, so I probably will just be trying to consider the different aspects relatively. Although I may bring in counting at a later stage, but I do not have the capacity yet to handle that much of a consideration. I think the best thing we can take from this is to see the ranking of the dignities and debilities, to know about them, and to especially try to remember the accidental fortitudes and debilities for the houses, because that can be very interesting if you're trying to time something or put a planet in a good house to elect something. So definitely something to remember. So let's jump back over to Ramsey's book, and we'll look at chapter or the introduction to elections, and pray that the wisdom of God will allow us to use them in the correct way. So before we do that, we're just going to glance at the essential dignities and debilities. I pulled this chart up for the video, but honestly, the organization of it really perplexes my mind. It's not the chart I usually use, so we'll just take the time to glance through it. Face of Mars in Gemini is 10 to 20 degrees. I think that is a face that Mars is in the annual revolution for the fixed signs for 2021. So that's one I hadn't considered. I definitely want to weigh the debilities and fortitudes for Mars, making that trine to Saturn, because I think that's going to be a very important axis for that revolution. So let's see. Mercury from 14 to 20. I don't think Mercury reaches that term. Okay, very much information. We'll have to. I'm going to have it up so that we can reference it while we look at the chart. When we get to that for the segment of the video. So we will jump over to Ramsey. Well, we have a lot to go through to actually get to the text, but we're going to read all of it anyway. All right, so we're actually going to start from the dedication on this one to see a little bit of what Ramsey intended it for. From gathering from the rest of his writings, he doesn't seem to care very much for elections, he really is building his edifice toward the annual revolution, and he seems to consider this sort of astrology to be more vain, which I understand, but I believe that he wouldn't have written it if he didn't ask us or look for us to seek the wisdom of God in it. So we're going to see what he intended it for and pray to God, praising him that he will show us wisdom to interpret this section in the right way. All right. So, to the Right Honorable Henry Parapoint, Marquis of Dorchester, Earl of Kingston upon Hull, Viscount Newark, and Lord Parapoint of Holmes Parapoint, health and life here, and eternal happiness hereafter. My Lord, when your honor shall consider the reason of this my bold dedication, I know, were not your honor of a more noble spirit than to judge of things by the first sight or glimpse thereof, I should have little or no cause to hope of acceptance at your honor's hands, but should rather justly be induced to expect, since it is my unhappiness to be a stranger to your honor, your frown rather than favor, and reprehension for this my boldness. But as it was nothing but really your honor's virtues, which, according to the philosopher, are the only badges of honor, and to love learning that was the occasion of this my transgression, I humbly presume, though through them, my fault will be venial, since the blame is your honor's, and that myself and this my small present shall find access in your honor's favor and protection. The subject of this piece is that part of astrology or natural philosophy which treateth of elections, teaching by the powerful influence of the superior and celestial bodies how to frame a fit and proper time for any manner of work belonging to the life of man in a natural way, there being according to that most elegant expression of the chief of philosophers and sagest of mortals, Solomon, in Ecclesiastes 3:1, a season for everything, and a time for every purpose under the sun. And truly it is a piece of that sublime learning that I fear it will pass the bounds of not only the common and ordinariest, but the indifferent capacities of most men, and in some measure put even the most judicious to seek, unless they are true sons or contemplators of nature and its mysteries and secrets. This for the generality. Yet what conduceth to the admiration of physic and phlebotomy, which according to Hippocrates and Galen, as I have sufficiently shown in the 10th chapter of the first book of this volume, and the first chapter of the 7th section of this very third treatise, can never be rightly administered without the help of this art, is more easily to be comprehended, as also what tendeth to the use of navigation and husbandry. Wherefore, since this my fabric of the restoration of astrology, or the true natural philosophy, which is foursquare finished now, after my great pains and care, and brought to light, it imploreth your patronage, and especially this corner, lest the unworthiness of the author may be a means of its fall to the ground, without the least notice taken thereof, or hope of recovery, unless your honor's nobility, virtues, and learning be a gracious support thereunto. With the which, if your honor be munificently pleased to grant, it will be a perpetual rock unto it, and an inexpressible fame unto him whose height of ambition is to be my lord, your honor's servant, whilst he is William Ramsey. Thank God. Thank God. And Lord, we ask your favor that we may know how to approach these mysteries and the wisdom that comes from you alone, the only wise God. Unto you we seek. In Jesus' name, amen. So, to the reader, thou art here presented with the whole art of elections, which may be very beneficial unto thee in many things, especially in the administration of physic, using of husbandry and navigation, for which considerations I have undertaken to divulge the whole body thereof, for herein are the rules infallible. Yet in others, by reason, they are to depend on several other considerations, which we place as groundworks, viz., the revolutions of the years of the world, eclipses, great conjunctions, and in some measure nativities. They are very intricate and doubtful. And truly, I may say, they seldom or never prove true. By reason, few that undertake the practice thereof understand the fundamentals and groundworks, and how to order and dispose of them, or will take the pains to consider every particular which is requisite to be seriously pondered and weighed before election can be made on any particular thing. Wherefore, let him that presents this book unto thee advise thee, as thou tenderest the propagation of the art and thy own reputation, not to dare to put any part thereof in practice, unless it be, I say, so much as thou findest tend to the administration of physic, phlebotomy, or the using of husbandry and navigation, till thou art very well acquainted with nature, and canst prove thou knowest the fundamentals and reasons of every particular point of this science, lest thou become ridiculous and odious to the ignorant and the rural of the world, by thy frequent failings, which thou canst never avoid if thou knowest no more than what is here verbally delivered, or if thou trustest barely to the writings of any man whatsoever. For the illiterate, by this thy weakness, being nowise capable of the mysteries of these knowledges, will sooner condemn the art as imperfect or faulty, than thee or thy judgment, which art rather worthy of reprehension. For by the right knowledge of the divine practice thereof, thou mayest attain to admirable speculations and rare things. For it was far from my intentions in the penning thereof to have it thus abused, which thou mayest soon do, by basely putting it openly in practice, as some have the resolutions of questions, and so not only become an occasion of derision to thyself with them, but also an ill requitor of my pains and care towards thee, and bring this part of the art, if not all under the notion thereof, into the contempt of the world, the which in itself is good and pure, though sublime. For there is nothing more certain than that there is a proper time and season for everything under the sun. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, nay, even to the throwing away of stones and gathering them again there is a time. And to be short, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the sun. See the book of Ecclesiastes, etc. And that all inferior things are ruled and ordered by the superior. I have here no more to say than only refer thee to the first epistle and first treatise. For what man is there that will deny that the subtile soul and life of the world quickneth and disposeth of all things therein, or that all terrestrial things have their dependency on the motion and influence of the stars and planets, and their configurations, occasioning the like sympathy as is between the lodestone and iron, there being nothing exempted from their power that is composed of the four elements which they order, dispose, and govern. Nay, even the hardest stones we see have a sympathetical quality wherewith, and are wrought upon by their penetrative power and virtue, which still before rain, especially if it be of continuance, even when the heavens but incline to moisture, sweat drops of water, and become as wet as if they had been rained on, or washed over by some hand. Many such like arguments I could produce for the proof hereof, but since the subject of almost the whole first book tendeth hereunto, I shall say no more, but again advise thee not to put any part of this book in practice, till the grounds thereof be well apprehended by thee, so thou mayest not violate his intentions that have left it to thee, and desires to have no occasion to write himself other than thy loving friend, William Ramsey. Thank God for this wonderful writing. Thank you, Jesus. All right, so I could read this entire table of contents, and I might. Seeing that it's not that long, and honestly, this table of contents may order things in our mind in a new way, seeing that it's all very well in order, and ordered by the order of the signs and the houses. So I am going to read this, and then we may continue on to section 1. So, the contents of every section and chapter contained in the third book of this treatise being an introduction to elections. Section 1. Comprehending an introduction to elections or necessary instructions for the electing of any manner of work by the secret operations of the heavens, by the nature of the signs, planets, and aspects of the moon, etc. Chapter 1. Containing some necessary instructions to the judgments of elections. Chapter 2. Of the signs and their significations in elections, and of the hindrances of the moon, being a farther instruction to the judging of elections. Chapter 3, showing elections by the aspects of the moon to the other 6 planets and by her mansions. Section 2, containing rules for electing such matters as appertain to the signification of the first house of heaven. Containing necessary rules for putting children to nurse, to school, and to trade. Chapter 2, of the rules of elections for the cutting of hair. Chapter 3, of cutting of nails or the hands or feet, also corns. Section 3, of rules for electing matters appertaining to the second house. Chapter 1, of receiving and borrowing of money. Chapter 2, containing other rules concerning borrowing and lending. Chapter 3, of buying to profit again by the sale thereof. Chapter 4, of selling to advantage. Chapter 5, being a farther instruction touching buying and selling in an ordinary way of the world. Chapter 6, of buying of clothing or putting on of apparel. Chapter 7, of flitting or removing from one place to another. Chapter 8, containing rules for electing any work in the art of distillation or alchemy. Section 4, comprehending rules in electing such matters as appertain to the signification of the third house. Chapter 1, of short journeys and their elections. Chapter 2, of making friendship between brethren, or any two at variance. Chapter 3, of applying the mind to study, or study to divine matters or contemplations. Section 5, containing rules of elections appertaining to the signification of the fourth house. of building of houses, of building of castles and cities, of building of churches, of building or erecting of mills, of pulling down or destroying of houses or any fabric whatsoever, containing rules of elections in buying of land, houses, or heritages, of buying of land for husbandry and not to build upon, of bringing of water to a house either by conduit, pipe, pump, and of digging of wells, of tillage or manuring of the ground, of renting, hiring, and letting of houses, land or fruit, or any other thing to be let or hired, of planting of trees or grafting, of sowing of seeds in the ground, of ridding houses or places from evil spirits. Section 6, containing rules for electing a time for the work or thing appertaining to the fifth house. Chapter 1, showing a fit time for the procreation of boys or girls. Chapter 2, of delivering a dead child. Of christening or circumcising of children. Of giving and receiving of gifts or presents. Containing rules for electing a time for putting on of apparel. Of feasting or eating of meat. Of drinking of wine or other drinks, of writing of letters or anything else of ingenuity, of making odoriferous smells and unguents, of sending ambassadors or messengers. Section 7, of elections appertaining to the sixth house. Of the true knowledge of the crisis or critical and judicial days, very useful for those that study physic, of applying medicines generally to all the parts of the body of man, of administering medicines to the diseases of the head, of applying remedies to the eyes and preparatives in general, of applying remedies to the nose, of injecting clysters and stopping of rheums or fluxes, of the administration of gargarisms or sneezings and such like, of giving of vomits, of administering purges and physic laxative, of bathing and electing a time thereof, of electing a time for using chirurgery, of electing a time for phlebotomy or bloodletting, also for applying ventoses, of the physicians going to the patient, of hiring of servants, of buying of birds and letting them fly to return again, of buying four-footed beasts, of bringing up dogs or taming of small cattle. Section 8, containing elections appertaining to the seventh house. Of the elections appertaining to the signification of the seventh house and touching marriage, of venereal sports, of partnership or agreements or things between two, of going to war, or beginning of differences and duels, quarrels, lawsuits, controversies, and the like, of making peace, suppressing or encountering of rebels, and storming of castles and towns, of buying of arms and preparing of instruments of war, on ships or galleys, of seeking of fugitives and examining of thieves and malefactors, to know the subject and scope of the whisperings or clandestine practices of any two, and at playing at chess or any other sitting game to win, fitting, of hunting, fowling, and fishing. Section 9, containing elections appertaining to the signification of the 8th house, of making of wills, of the heritages of the dead. Section 10, containing the elections of the 9th house of heaven, of the returning of such as are absent, and of going away, going of journeys, and entering into any place, of building of ships and galleys, and of launching, and of launching them, and of voyaging by sea, of learning of sciences, and of singing and music. Section 11, containing elections appertaining to the signification of the 10th house, of electing kings and governors, and of their installing and beginning their rule or government, of obtaining favor of kings and great men, justice on enemies and pardons, also of going of progresses with the king or any other grandee, of learning any art or occupation. Section 12, containing such elections as are under the signification of the 11th house of heaven, of accomplishing anything hoped for, and of gaining a good repute and the love of friends, of obtaining of promises and requests. Section 13, comprehending the elections of the 12th house, of freeing of prisoners and captives, of buying and riding of horses, etc. All right, thank God. My God. Thank you, Jesus. All right, so I am certain that there are many more practical things that the 12 houses pertain to, especially in our modern day. I don't know when I'd be buying a horse or riding one, but I may need my car worked on. So these are various things that I hope just simply jump out at you as we read these more archaic meanings to the 6 houses, or 12 houses, I mean. So I hope that the train of insight can jump out for you as we look at what the world was like during the author's time when these were the considerations of the 12 houses. But as well, we know that the 12 houses have more meanings than we've been given elections here for, and I know that if we read another book on elections, we would find many more. So take it as an exercise to expand. All right, so I think we'll read this section and take a brief look back at the 2021 chart for the Eastern United States and see if any other insight jumps out at us. All right? Okay. Thanks for listening thus far. I'm glad you enjoy hearing this. I hope it's a blessing to you. And so we go. So, book the 3rd of the Introduction to Elections. Fully comprehending the rules of the ancients in electing a time for any manner of work. Section 1. Comprehending an introduction to elections, or necessary instructions for electing any manner of work by the secret operations of the heavens, by the nature of the signs, planets, and aspects of the moon, etc. We have found most of the ancients to be very curious in this manner of judicature, but some more excellent than others. Wherefore, since the knowledge thereof is not only delectable and rare, but also very useful and profitable, both for eschewing evil and choosing the good, as also for that the verity thereof is wonderful, if the rules of art be diligently observed, and with care and discretion practiced, as also for that I earnestly desire the students in this noble art may daily more and more increase in knowledge, as I have said. I have thought good here to give you, without either fraud or deceit, the most judicious and rational rules of the ancients concerning the electing or choosing a time for any work incident to the affairs of mankind, whether particularly appertaining to a man's own particular person, or his estate, friends or enemies, etc. Isn't that wonderful? So he gives us a clue here, one that ought to be obvious, but, may not be, that to use these elections to choose the evil and avoid the good would be an abuse. So he's saying that these things are to be used for lawful means. Wisdom is not for unlawful purposes, and should you elect something unlawful on the basis thereof, it will be frustrated. Or if it has a seeming advantage to you, I would watch out, because these things are for wisdom, which is given to those who love God and fear his name. So with that in mind, let's continue to see some necessary instructions to the judging of elections. In all authors that ever I yet met with, I find that there can be no time elected in this our astrological way of electing advantageous to anyone whose nativity or time of birth is not exactly known, for according unto it must you frame your election, together with respect to the revolution of the year. And Zahel, Bonatus, Meshalah, and Dariot say that in case the nativity of a man cannot be attained, respect must be had to the time of the question. The reason is, as I conceive, for that if the question be radical, the querent shall have the same significator, or one of the same nature, in the question as he hath in his nativity. And this I have ever found true in all that ever I met with that could produce their nativities. Wherefore it is true in all that wherefore it is that the ancients conclude, as well indeed they may, that God, the omnipotent and omniscient creator of the heavens and the earth, and all things therein, hath made the earth of the four elements, but the heavens, being the quintessence of them, he hath made to surround and enclose it, that by the secret working of the anima mundi, or soul of the world, which Zale called rem subtilum, the which, saith he, scient sapientes, a subtle or spiritual quality which is known to the wise, which occasioneth such a sympathy as between the iron and lodestone, as that all inferior things and actions have their dependency and government from the superior. But although this be the judgment of the ancients, who say, look to the ascendant of the nativity or question, and make your election accordingly, yet I say, as most agreeable to truth and reason, let the figure of the revolution of the years of the world for that year be regarded, and therefore, or according thereunto, elect your business, as being the true radix, root or ground thereof. But note that if the ascendant and its lord be unfortunate in your radix, or the revolution of the world, there is no election can be made anywise to advantage the body or the party for whom you would elect an advantageous time. And so consider and understand of any election whatsoever, viz., if the chief significator of any business be unfortunate in the radix, that is, in our revolution, there can be no time elected to prevent the mischief threatened, for whom the Lord hath ordained to destruction or punishment. He causeth one thing or other to be incident unto that party so ordained to punishment, either by inclination or causality, casualty, according to his divine will and preordination, and the harmonious concordancy of astrology with divinity, etc., that it might come to pass. And so, on the contrary, for a man's happiness. But this comes to pass through repentance. For I have ever found men in this condition either to go on still in their ways without reproof, or being reproved, will take so small notice thereof, as that they will hardly believe it, or have an inclination to study amendment or prevention of the evil. Wherefore, these particular things in elections ought to have their dependency on the general fates. But as I have but now said, the figure of the revolution of the world for that year ought to be regarded and concluded the radix or groundwork of all your elections. For according to the nature of the significator therein must your election be framed, or you shall never be perfect in this art. Hence it is that often we shall find some kind of men and occupations thrive and prosper some years more than in others, and again, on the contrary, do all what they can, their business still, and endeavors go backward. The reason is their significator is more fortified or debilitated in the radix. And we see that such shall in an election by Saturn and Mars have a good prosperous day, and upon the square or opposition of the moon to Saturn or Mars, although on a mischievous day. Because these malevolents were chief rulers or significators of the business in hand, things or persons, etc., in the radix. Consider also the places of any eclipse or great conjunction in every year, so that when your true significator is known, and his essential and accidental fortitudes and debilities, you cannot err, the following rules being diligently and warily observed, there being an harmony and such a concordancy betwixt the celestial creatures and our terrestrial affairs, according to that excellent saying of Hermes, there is nothing here beneath that is not governed and ruled by what is above. Know then that in judging of the stars in elections, special care must be had unto the business in hand, for according unto the nature thereof must your business be ordered and your time chosen. As for earthly businesses, as planting and sowing and the like, an earthy sign is to be chosen or placed in the ascendant. If appertaining to fire, a fiery sign. If to the water, a watery one, etc. As, for example, if you would elect a time to plant, you must prefer Virgo before any other of the signs, because she is an earthly sign, and such an one too as is participating more of the nature of the fruits of the earth than any other, viz. Taurus or Capricorn. And so understand of any business. Be sure you still elect a sign proper to your business, and agreeable to the nature thereof. And for the speedy dispatch of any business, let a movable sign be chosen. If for permanency you would elect any time, take a fixed sign. If you be indifferent, or desire your business shall neither be of long or short continuance, prefer a common sign, etc. But still, look to the fundamental grounds of elections, viz. To fortify your chief significators, and chiefly the moon, because she hath a general signification in all things, in journeys, times, places, and all businesses whatsoever. Also the sun, he being, as it were, chief ruler or king amongst the other planets. But more particularly, the planet signifying the business in hand, as if your election be concerning war or fireworks, you must fortify Mars. If to speak to the king, the sun, to gain money, Jupiter. If concerning marriage or love affairs, Venus. Because these significations, these planets are generally of, and so understand of any business whatsoever, still have a care to fortify the planet signifying your business, in general as well as particular, if you can. In like manner, you must choose and fortify the sign signifying your business in general, for, as I have said, as is the nature of your business, such must the sign be you choose and fortify. As if you would go by water, as to sea, etc., you must fortify a watery sign, and more especially Cancer, for that she is the house of the moon. If by land, as a journey, etc., an earthy sign, etc., viz. Free from misfortune, or affliction of the malevolent aspects of the infortunes, and place it in the ascendant of your election, or to the Lord of the ascendant therein, or the Lord of the ascendant therein, or the moon, or both if possible. And this is necessary in all elections. And the ancients, moreover, have for men elected a masculine sign, for women a feminine, but this is needless, etc. The sign also, and house signifying your business in your radix, ought to be regarded and well dignified. Also fortify the house and sign signifying the business in your election. As if you would elect a time for profit, you must fortify in the figure of your election the second house in the radix, its sign and the Lord thereof, as well as the second in your election, etc. In all elections, remember to fortify the ascendant, its Lord and disposer of him, and the fourth, and the Lord of the fourth, and also his dispositor. For by fortifying the ascendant, the Lord thereof, and his dispositor, the health and safety of the party's body electing is promised. By fortifying the fourth, its Lord, and his dispositor, a good and safe conclusion and end of the business. But note, as aforesaid, that if a malevolent planet be significator in anything in the radix, you must fortify it, and not think the making of fortune. These, Jupiter or Venus, which are but generally so significators, will be beneficial, for it will often prove contrary. For all men are not ruled by Jupiter and Venus, neither, as I say, are they always fortunes, for accidentally they may be infortunes, and when they are lords of the 8th, 12th, and 6th, they are occasions of sickness, poverty, imprisonment, mischief, and death, as effectually as Saturn or Mars. For every planet must do the office whereunto it is ordained, and so by the same rule may Saturn and Mars be fortunes, and so they are to those they chiefly rule, and so to such things as are properly under their dominion, either naturally or accidentally. Wherefore the true knowledge of your significator in elections of the business intended is of great value and worthy serious consideration. Also, in electing any work, have special care to fortify the part of fortune, the lord thereof, and its dispositor, so that they be either in body or aspect helped by the fortunes, and free from the configurations of the malevolence. Let not the lord of your ascendant by any means be retrograde, for it will occasion tardity and hindrance in anything, although all the other significators were essentially strong and promising the effecting of the business. It causeth also much trouble and pains in the business, although naturally never so easy to be accomplished. My friends, I believe we're going to stop here in the middle of a chapter, because we already have enough to think about, I believe. And I don't want to just read this without thinking about it or giving you an opportunity to think about it. So we're going to pass on to looking at charts at this time before I lose my ability to think for the day. And we'll return to this next time. Isn't it interesting? I'm glad we chose to read this section on elections, because it just gives us more practical thought about what these things mean, doesn't it? I think it ties certain aspects together. Okay. So there we have that. Okay. So we have the 2021 chart arranged for the east of the United States. A fixed sign is arising, so this, based on the philosophy, will give us the affair of the year. So at the beginning of this video, we looked at the significators of rich and noblemen, kings, standard armor bearers, clergymen, students, merchants, lawyers, women, friars, and monks, and they according to the significations of the planets. And we looked at accidental and essential fortitudes and debilities. So a lot of detail. But now I can see here that Mars is not in its term. But the North Node is in the Mars's term, and Mars is applying to partile to the North Node. So I would say that gives an accidental fortitude to Mars being there. Really, in this chart, I wanted to see how much Mars was fortified as a clarification, a point of clarification, if you will. So he's not in his own face, so he doesn't gain that essential dignity. And he's not in reception by the Lord of Gemini, Mercury, who's in the house of Jupiter, who's in Saturn's house, who's in his own house. So we don't have reception with Mars. Mars does not have reception. So it has the peregrine debility, not being in his own house or exaltation. He's not in his detriment or his fall. So we'll consider that Mars has some essential debility that we need to make up for. So, is he impartile to the fortunes? You know, Mars isn't an orb of a trine to Jupiter. We could argue that, but I don't think we really can. It's close, but no cigar, right? So he is in partile conjunction with the North Node, so that gains him 4 accidental fortitudes. He is in the 5th house, 3 accidental fortitudes. So Mars isn't in a terrible spot here, and being trine with Saturn, that's a lot of flow with Saturn in his own strong dignity of triplicity and house. So that's not bad. I mean, that could be real. Those planets. See, what I'm looking for there is, we're considering if Saturn is incredibly strong, well, it's connected to Mars. Is Mars weak? Because that could be mischievous. So this doesn't look particularly mischievous, at least as far as Saturn is concerned. Seeing that the North Node gives it some accidental fortitude. So that's considerable, isn't it? So Venus here is under Sun's beams and combust. So Venus, although she's in her exaltation of Pisces, isn't particularly strong. So she's at 28 degrees Pisces. She doesn't have any term or face. She is incredibly close to her exalted degree, though. So maybe Venus has more fortitude than we suppose, but let's compare that to its place under Sun's beams. Combust of the Sun. Combust of the Sun. Just briefly looking at the definition of combust. I don't think it has to cross over the body of the Sun yet. Within 8 degrees 30 minutes of the Sun, either before or after the Sun's body. So that is 5 essential debilities, accidental debilities. She is in the 2nd house, that's 3 accidental fortitudes. So Venus is strong, and Mars is also strong despite the challenges. So it looks like there's a lot of challenge if we want to consider that fortitudes and debilities manifest naturally and not just in their sum. We could say that there are many difficulties both for Venus and for Mars, and yet they triumph over them. And the same goes for Jupiter being in his own term. So there are many challenges in this chart, and yet everything there, it seems that most planets have something that's giving them fortitude. The moon is applying to the trine to Jupiter, and that's very considerable, isn't it? That's how many fortitudes is that? I believe, let's see. That's 4 fortitudes for the moon there. In the 5th house, I don't think the moon has any essential dignities here. Being in Gemini. You know, the North Node is still going towards its exaltation. I don't entirely understand that, but that is considerable, isn't it? So, no, the moon doesn't have any essential fortitudes in Gemini, but it does gain this accidental fortitude for being in the 5th house. I think one of the weakest planets in this scheme is Mercury, considering that it's a convertible planet. It's in detriment. It's the ruler of the 8th house. It's square Mars. It is in the 2nd house, so it gains fortitude for that. It's in Jupiter's house. Jupiter is strong, so a strong ruler of a house is good. It seems like everything is supporting everything else from falling apart. It's a very Saturn-ruled chart, and in the next few episodes, we're going to be talking about the Lord of the Year. That's coming in section 2 of the mundane astrology section. But, you know, we're just going to have to take it as slow as it goes doing this format. I hope you're getting something out of this format. I don't know if my dreary sort of tone is pleasant to you or not. But, you know, I have that going for me. So, let's see. Let's look at the orientations and the occidentation, if I may say so. So, talking about 4 a.m., this is a night chart. Let's see, what's ascending? Okay, so from Taurus to Scorpio, we have the oriental side of the chart, right? Am I right about that? Because they're still approaching the 10th house. So, from the cusp of Taurus to Scorpio, we have that as oriental. Let's look at that. Saturn. So it looks like Venus and Mercury gain some debilities for being oriental, but Jupiter and Saturn gain more. And Mars being occidental gains stability. So it kind of goes along with the rest of the themes of the chart. Jupiter and Saturn are so strong in this fixed Aquarius. They're so incredibly strong. But Mercury and Mars are especially being challenged. And Venus, although she doesn't look like it, has quite a few more fortitudes. So we can say that Venus ruling the 9th house for this chart, and also looking at Jupiter and Saturn, religious, or should I say truly connected, people that are truly connected to the authority of the kingdom of God, wherever they may be, will be very prosperous and doing well. And I think we'll see people seeking out mysteries among the people in general and looking for that firm foundation that is the throne of God and his name, to trust in that. Okay, is that enough? I think we've talked for hours now, but that's okay. You know, this video format, you can consume it. You can study it at your leisure. So no big deal that we spent such a long time on that. I think it was good. I think we were thorough enough to make some incremental progress. So I thank you. I praise God for you. I praise God for His grace. And I thank you for listening again. So God bless you and keep you and turn His face towards you and give you peace. And I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.